Hello everyone, I wanted to show one of our new compressor mounts. This is a new Firewall compressor mount for the ARB Single Compressor for the Jeep Gladiator and the Jeep JLs. So once you have your two pieces that come, basically you have this piece that will sit on the Firewall, bolts down on the top of the cowl, and it also has a brace that runs into the bottom side of the Firewall to brace everything up and make it nice and strong. So when you bolt these together, you want to make sure that you have the nuts on the inside. That way you get good clearance with the button head screws on the back from the little plastic channel that runs along the Firewall. Now on the compressor itself, this is the stock configuration that this compressor comes. What you want to do is flip this body inside of the casing. Now to do that, it's fairly easy, and you want to do that to make it easier to adjust everything once it's actually in the Jeep, because you have two adjustment screws here, and unless you flip this casing, it's going to make it very hard to get to these to adjust how you want it to sit on the mount once it's mounted in the Jeep. So this makes it much easier. But again, it's very simple. You got two 10mm screw nuts, bolts that are right here. You just want to take these out. You want to loosen up the little 10mm here on the manifold, and then just spin this out of the way. And what that does, you then come in here, loosen up these two black screws on the casing, and once it's loose enough, you can slide it right out of the casing, arm with one hand, and just want to flip it. So flip it. Get this out of the way. Once you have that slid back into the casing, just slightly tighten up your adjustment screws here just so it's tight and doesn't slide around on you. And then you want to flip this little guy back in this place. Take these two 10mm bolts, tighten those down. Where my other one go? There it is. Get those tightened down. Snug those up. Snug up the 10mm here on the manifold, and you're good to go to get ready to mount the compressor to the compressor mount. So the next step that you want to do on the mounting base for the compressor, you have four of these 4mm hex nuts here that basically hold the compressor to the mounting plate. So if you remove two of these, what you can do then is you can move down the base to make your life much more easy when it comes to mounting the four nuts over onto the compressor plate. Now, one thing I have found, and this again is going to be a matter of what type of stuff you have in your Jeep and where you wanted your placement, but I have found that if you slide it a little bit more to the left, it snugs it in a little bit more toward the battery or toward the fuse box, and gives you a little bit more clearance over on the other side. Now, these do work with the engine cover if you have it on it, but you might have to trim a little bit on the engine cover here in order for it to not conflict with the compressor, which, like many of you know now, with the 2022s and newer, they're not even including the engine cover, so it's not something you're going to need to worry about unless you do have the engine cover, and unless you actually want to keep the engine cover on the Jeep. If you do, like I say, you might want to trim a little bit off just to the back corner, basically, that makes it work a little bit better with the compressor. Okay, so now that I have the compressor set up on the compressor mount, as you can see, I've got all four nuts and everything bolted to the plate and bolted to the compressor mount. And you can see what you want to look for is to make sure that you have your casing adjustment screws on the top, so that way you can adjust the up and down positioning of the compressor once it's mounted into the Jeep. The other thing to make sure to look for is that the air filter is on the right side, because if it does stay on the left side with the way that the compressor comes from ARB, the filter does conflict with the fuse box some. But then it also gives you your wiring on this side over to the battery side, which makes it really easy to get everything wired up. So the next step will be take you out to the Jeep and show you how to get this installed. All right, so now that we're outside, You got your compressor mounted to the compressor base. You got your brace mounted to the compressor also. And one thing I would suggest before actually mounting the compressor to the bracket is go ahead and put your brace on the bracket and have it set up. Test fit it into the Jeep just to make sure that you have your bracket set in there correctly. For the most part, if you get this bracket set up to where you're even with the bottom of the base and then kind of just in the center of your slots, it's pretty well going to be where you need it to be. Plus there's a fairly good sized hole here. This is really just so that you got the spot which is on the firewall, which you can see right here. There's another stud on the firewall. Now there will be a factory 10mm nut on that. You're going to want to take that nut off because we're going to use a larger fender washer and locking nut to go back on. So like I say, once you have your compressor mounted, and I'll show you this also before I mount it, there are a couple little slots on the top. There's one over here on the side, and then there's two holes that are put into the compressor mount. Now what these holes are for is to be able to mount your relay from the compressor, just depending on where you want to put it. Most likely it's going to fit the best sitting behind here. These little slots are zip ties, for zip ties. So if you have any more cabling and stuff running across the back like I've got here, it gives you a spot to be able to tie down some wiring if you've already got it going across the back of the cowl. So you want to take off the two factory 10mm bolts that are on these studs also, so that your studs are open for the compressor mount. And then basically you just want to lift it in. It might take you a little bit to get it worked in the right way. Set it over those studs. Get past all my wiring here. And then you just want to make sure that down on the bottom here that you're getting that brace over top of that stud. Let me come around just to check from this side, and I'm over the stud, so I'm in a good spot. And it really is a pretty simple setup. You'll have some fender washers and some locking M6 nuts. So you want to put your fender washer on the top, and in my case, since I've got some wiring and stuff, I would put that on also. Let's get that set on. You see it drop down on there a little bit better. I'm just going to start my nut on top of one of those. I'm going to start my nut on this one. Now the hardest part of this whole install is getting to this stud nut that's underneath here. Now fortunately for me, my hands aren't very big, so it makes it a little bit easier for me. Now the other thing, this will come with a few fender washers and a few locking nuts, just in case you were to happen to drop one of these. Because it is tight, but you want to get your hand, if you can do it. Now if you can't get your hand in here, you can get a socket just with an extension and get you a socket back in here. Maybe use a piece of tape or something to help you get your nut and stuff on that stud. But me, I can reach my hand underneath. I'm going to set my fender washer on. I'm going to slide in, get my nut on this stud, get that started. Play around with this a little bit. All right, then once you get that on, now again, if you're fortunate to have a small hand, and I've got just a small ratchet with a 10mm socket on here, and I can reach in there and get that tightened down. I suggest tightening down the bottom on the brace first. Now what you want to get your brace installed first. Get that tightened down, snug down, and snug up your stuff on top. And we'll go around here. Like I say, with me, I would put this on and bolt it down also. But as you can see, it is super strong, especially with having that brace that goes underneath. Now, going back to the previous steps, like I mentioned before, the reason you want to put these adjustment screws on the top is because now they're on the top and you can adjust your height or your side to side, just to make sure you got good clearance for all your hoses and everything else. Then your wiring is right here by the battery, so especially with the way that the harness comes with this compressor, you can basically cut everything on it off that you don't need, for a quick and simple setup. Now you could stop right here and just mount an air coupler directly to your compressor and you're good to go. What I will have available is I'm going to be putting together an air kit also that will have the air fittings to go from here, the air hose running over to the fender, which will basically have the same fender setup that we've had for a while now. It's got the one spot for an air coupler, one spot for a switch. So that way you can have everything in the one spot, turn your compressor on and off instead of using one of your auxiliary switches. A lot of people like to use the auxiliary switch, a lot of people don't. I'm one of the ones that I actually prefer having the switches right by my compressors. That way I know that when I'm going to use it, I turn it on, I turn it off, it's all in one spot. I don't have to take up one of my auxiliary switches. But I mean, that's pretty much it. And it's a simple setup. It does work with the 3.6 liter and the 3.6 liter with the eTorque. I am still testing to see if it will work with the 2.0s. If it works with the 2.0, it may also work with the 4xe. And this may actually work with the diesel. I got to do some testing on that too. So I'll be looking out some of you guys with a diesel and the 2.0s to help me in testing this and getting it going. So. But again, that's the easy setup for the new ARB single compressor mount that goes onto the Firewall. We still have the one that goes on the other side for the non-eTorque Jeeps. So we'll have both options in case you want to have one that's not so close to the engine. But going to be live on the website in a couple of days, 813fabrication.com. And check us out online. We're on 813 Fabrication on Instagram, 813 Fabrication Design on Facebook. You can find us anywhere. Give us an email. We're always online. We're always able to help. And we want to just help you with the customer service. So if you have any questions, just let me know. So, thanks.